Nice work, nice work. I love that game. I get super competitive with it. You definitely get to see some character come out in some people and how ruthless they are, how they hold on to that pen, how people snatch that pen from you, right? It can get vicious. Nice, nice. That's a good group right there. Us, right? We can use stories to explain things in life. Jesus used stories to kind of give examples of relevance in the Bible, right? So there's so many different things we can use stories for. And tonight, I want you to flip to Luke 10, verse 25. All right, so we're gonna read another parable from Jesus. It's a parable of the Good Samaritan. We may or may not watch a video on that. I'm not sure. Let's read through it and then we'll see. All right, so let me know when you're all there. Put your hand on your head if you find it. Marianne's got it. Great. Good job. You guys over there. Yep. Is it up there? Yeah. Luke 10:25. All right. I'll go ahead and read it if you want to jump ahead. If you can't find it, it's up on the screen there. So hopefully this is the same version I think I sent. All right, so one day an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question: "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus replied, "What does the law of Moses say? How do you read it?" The man answered, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "Right," Jesus told him. "Do this and you will live." So to stop right there, the verse 27 there should sound familiar, right? We've heard that several different times in different areas of the Bible, something similar to that. Does anybody know in Matthew 22, verses 23 through 33, and Mark 12, 18 through 27, does anybody know what that is? Yeah. So what let's see, is it on the back of my shirt? GC squared. Does anybody know what that means? What the GC stands for? Great Commandment and the Great Commission, right? So the Great Commandment, right? So that should look familiar. It's very similar to what's said here. So if we go on, the man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And Jesus replied with a story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side of the road. Then a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, "Take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here." Now, which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, "The one who showed him mercy." Then Jesus said, "Yes, now go and do the same." So real quick, you want to play our video so we can kind of illustrate what's going on here in the story. All right. So that video is actually made by the same person that made the video last week, so you can see some of the same hokiness that was going on there. Personally, I love the music that went along with that. You can definitely see those characters getting down to the music and moving. So, hey, listen up. Listen up. So, going back to the very beginning, it talks about how an expert in the religious law stood up to test Jesus, right? So, people were always trying to catch Jesus, whether it was, trying to catch him not knowing what he's talking about, or to kind of just have, some evidence against him to use against Jesus. And so often when he was tested, he responded with a question. You guys ever have teachers, when you ask a question, they ask a question back? Isn't that frustrating? They always get you with that stuff. I know Reg does that all the time too. So, but it's frustrating. But usually those people, they know what they're talking about. They're getting at something by asking a question from you to see where you're going with that question, right? Just to get some more information from you, just to see what you know and where you're going. So then it talks about a neighbor, right? Our neighbor. What is our neighbor? Who's your neighbor to you? Your friends? Okay, the people next to you that you keep pointing at, right? Okay, that guy right there. Okay, the people in your neighborhood, right? We think of that. In this time, we're talking about fellow Israelites is what they're getting at with neighbors, right? So then, getting into the actual story, we're talking about the different characters. Okay, so what are the different characters of the story? Yeah, the Samaritan, that's one. Yeah, the bandits, the priest, the temple assistant, right? Is there anybody else? I think that's it. So the traveler, so there's the traveler too, right? The guy that got beat up, mugged, essentially, right? Left for dead on the side of the road. Okay, so that's one. Then we have the thieves, the bandits, right? The mean people that jumped the traveler to take his money, right? Then we have the priest. So in this situation, you see in the video, you see in this story as we read, is it surprising to you that a priest would just walk right by? Somebody's hurt on the side of the road. You would think that's someone that you could count on, right? Okay, but there's a reason that priest didn't do anything, right? Back then, if a priest were to come upon a dead person and touch that person, they would be deemed unclean and couldn't enter the temple. So for him, he's just following the law. I can't go over there, right? Otherwise, I can't go in the temple. I can't preach, right? The temple assistant too is flustered because I don't know. I don't think it's right that I help this person, right? Because they're also in the temple, right? So they don't feel good about that. But then there's a Samaritan. They call him the despised Samaritan, right? So this was somebody that Jews and Samaritans didn't really get along. The Jews despised the Samaritans, right? But Jesus really emphasized that point that this person was someone that the Jewish people didn't like, right? To really hammer home the point that this is a person you don't like. This is a person that did what you should do, right? So the Samaritan is the one that ends up helping. So in that story, you would think like a priest or a pastor would be the one to help, right? Or the temple assistant. Those would be the people you'd count on first. But it was the Samaritan, just a regular person that ended up being the one to help. The Samaritan didn't care who the person was that was hurt, all right? It could be a Jew, it could be anybody. Back in that time, it didn't matter. So what would we do in that situation? Right? You see someone on the side of the road that's hurt or down or something. What would you do? Right? Would you go along because you know what? I'm not an EMT, right? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a fireman, right? I don't know I don't have the tools to help, right? But you have a phone, you could call 911, right? Yeah. You could call 911, right? Yeah, back then they don't have that excuse, right? Right. You could do that. But maybe that's not what's needed. So we have different ways, listen up. We have different ways that we can help, right? But you have to be careful too, right? You can't just, if there's an unmarked van driving by and we think about um, loving our neighbor, you don't just, you can't forget stranger danger. Be smart about it, right? But we have ways that we can help people, even though, we're not a doctor. All right, so why don't you guys go ahead and break up into your small groups real quick? So let's have a group of guys with Graham, a group of guys with Alan, a group of girls with Marianne, and then between Carla and Becky over here. I'll come around and give you guys a sheet here with questions. There's also homework here on the top that your leaders can talk about. So to wrap up, I want to make sure that we know, like the priest and the temple assistant, even though they had legitimate reasons for not helping someone, God wants us to love God and love people, right? That should supersede these technicalities of the law, right? Pastor Lucas a few weeks ago talked about trying to get by just by a smidge, right? We're technically right, but it's not necessarily what we should do, right? So we should be loving God and loving people. You guys should hear that a lot at our church, right? It's our motto, so you should always be hearing that and trying to live that out. So last week, we learned that Jesus was a teacher and that he's after our hearts. This week, what I want us to remember is that he's a storyteller. He's a great storyteller, right? And we've gone through a series before with, talking about how Jesus, the storyteller, right? But he wants us to love others, and not just when it's easy, but always, right? There's going to be times, there's going to be people that you don't particularly like that need your love, all right? And we need to try to figure out a way to do that, how we can love others. On your sheets, I had some homework for you guys, and it's thinking of someone that that is somewhat of an outcast or that's mistreated, someone you find generally hard to love. And I know when I was in middle school and high school, there was probably a lot of those people that I would have had a hard time loving. But try to think of somebody this week and figure out a way that you can love on them, okay? And then if you do that, and I've done this type of challenge before, and I haven't had much of a response from people coming in the following weeks, I'd really like to see who can come back to me next week or in 2 weeks and say, hey, this is what I did, all right? And I'll reward you for that. So just make sure if you do something like that, you share that with me, and then I'll get you something for that. But it's really important that we focus on loving people, okay? Don't worry about the little technicalities. If we're loving God and we're loving people, we're doing the right thing, okay? All right, so if we can put up the Apostle Creed, we're going to do that again, and then we'll do tickets. All right, so everybody stand up. We'll read through this together, and then we'll do tickets. All right, ready? Here we go from the top. I believe in God, the Father Almighty,